Hey, welcome to Integrative Preparedness. I'm Steve Smith. I was out in the garden this morning trying to decide what video to make. I've got a whole bunch listed, but today I was trying to decide whether to do one on being what I call an adaptive, whether to be a gray man or an adaptive, and another one option to start my lessons from the Mafia series. And a situation came up that that dispelled both of those and gave me the perfect idea of what to do today because it illustrates what we're going through now and the what may be the seeds of harder things to come, and that is living under oppressive rules or living under an oppressive government. Um, Backing up just a little bit, and it had to do with a news story, and then what Kelly immediately said. I'm going to back up just a little bit, and for those of you, because I am going to be getting into the lessons from and what I should say here is what many call the mafia. And I've decided also to do that only over on Patreon. I have a decision making process, and I won't even call it a process, that I kind of have to wait for things just to come to me. I'll mull over and do this and do that, and weigh the pros and the cons, and pretty much the answer will finally just come to me. And it seems as if it's not necessarily a part of the decision making process, but it's kind of how I've always seemed to operate. So that came to me today that it needs to be over on Patreon, and maybe I'll explain more about that later over there. But I should give something here, and I do want to share some things that might be interesting to some of you, if whether or not you go over there, and that is the misnomer of this idea of the mafia. Now, the term mafia, first off, it was never. Well, let me back up. It's now used to describe a whole number of things. The Mexican mafia, the Russian mafia, the whatever mafia. Anytime there seems to be a group of organized crime, the American press and the American people will gobble it up as a such and such mafia. The music mafia, John Rich, who I like, he got together his bunch of little folks, and they called themselves the music mafia. Well, this is a total misuse of the term, which I think I'll explain here now. First off, the people associated with that, the members of that lifestyle, never used that term. They never called themselves that. They never referred to their lifestyle as that. It is based in folklore, and this story was told to me by my father when I was very young, and I'll give you some other things that you can refer to and read if you have any interest in this. And it was the story of Sicily is an excellent example, and this is what I'm going to get into in some of my talks on this over on Patreon. Sicily is an excellent example of how people find a way to live within and under an oppressive government. And this is what many fear, and I will include myself in that. Many fear is happening in our country here. Sicily was invaded by and conquered by everybody in the world over the centuries and centuries. If there was a ship sailing by, they conquered Sicily. Sicily was a little island out in the Mediterranean, off the toe of Italy, and as each wave of conquerors came through, they of course subjugated the indigenous population, as conquerors do, and the Sicilians, the native Sicilians, who kind of developed as a different subrace as a result of the influx of centuries of conquerors intermingling with the population. They developed a way to retain their own identity within this wave after wave, and a way to live according to their rules and their traditions, sometimes opposing and sometimes within the conqueror's restrictions. And that was the origins. Not just this. I mean, there were other groups. The organization usually referred to as a mafia, although here in the United States, it's mistakenly used for all Italian groups. But usually they talk about the Sicilian organization, and there were others throughout Italy. There was the Neapolitan Camorra, and that's not the ice cream of chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry. That means it's from Naples, and the broader group of the Ndrangheta, which is another group altogether. Anyway, so Sicily was invaded by and conquered by wave after wave of people, and one of those was the French. The story of where this term came from goes back to during the French occupation, and the story goes that a young woman, a beautiful young woman, was going to church one day um, uh, with her mother. And I'll go back and remind, this is a story told to me by my father when I was young. And interestingly enough, I read it in a book uh, years later by Joe Bonanno, and I'll say something about it. I referenced Bonanno, I think, in my first book or second book, whatever. Um, and anyway, and it's not a story that most people know. So if you haven't heard it, don't be surprised. So this beautiful young woman was going to church one day with her mother, and I forget why. And a French soldier accosted them, and a tussle ensued. And the story says that he took her behind the church and raped her. And the mother came running out, screaming, "Mafia, Mafia," which means my daughter, my daughter. Ma is mine, and Fia is daughter. And that brought the townspeople around. And the young woman's fiance, for honor, went and killed the offending soldier. And that caused the uprising of the Sicilian people against the French, which brought many other things. This cry, "Mafia, Mafia," was used as it kind of morphed into the saying, and it's an anagram, "Morta alla Francia, uh, Italia Anella." Okay, and what that means is "death to France," cries out Italy. So that's where this idea, it's more folklore than anything else. And jumping forward, the lessons coming from this are great. And just kind of wrapping up this a little bit before we get to what I was going to talk to today. The people within that organization never referred to it as that. Occasionally, Joe Valachi, when he came out back in the 60s, and he was the first real snitch to come forward and reveal some of the secrets. He didn't know a lot, but he knew a little bit to kind of inflame the attentions of the American people, and Bobby Kennedy went after him and all that, and see what happened to Bobby later. And he used the term Cosa Nostra. And from that, federal law enforcement, and you might or might not be aware that J. Edgar Hoover always denied that there was anything such as organized crime. He wanted pretty much the FBI to do nothing but work on interstate car theft because they were easy to solve, and bank robberies because they were also easy to solve and easy to catch. And he knew that organized crime was not easy to catch, and this will be things that I talk about on Patreon. And so he wanted to build up the reputation of the FBI, and he wanted the easy stuff, the low hanging fruit. And so he always, but really the reason that he always denied the existence of it is because the people, of this life, they had the goods on him. They had the goods on him. They kept him from coming out and revealing the existence of this network. And there's a great lesson there that I'll be talking about on Patreon. Anyway, Joe Valachi came out and he said that they called it Cosa Nostra. And so federal law enforcement started referring to it as La Cosa Nostra. Okay, and LCN, hear that bannered about amongst federal law enforcement a lot. LCN, La Cosa Nostra. Well, Cosa Nostra means our thing. And to put law in front of it would mean the our thing. Okay, so it's silly. It doesn't make any sense. So there is very little understanding about this situation amongst the general public, and really, to be honest, among law enforcement. There was only one guy, I think, and I worked in this for quite a while, and I never worked with any that understood it. There was one guy that understood it, and his name was Joe Pistone. He was the one who worked the Donnie Brasco case. In case you saw that movie, the movie, wasn't any, I should back up here and say for just a second too, because I made reference in, I think, the last video about a couple of stupid movies that people will get their ideas about this so-called mafia. And that was, what were they? Goodfellas, stupid movie. Casino, stupid movie. I happen to know about the case that Casino was based on because it had to do with Kansas City. And none of the stuff in there was true, and most of the situations that you see in there would never have happened. It makes good movies, never would have happened. Goodfellas, kind of the same way. Maybe I'll get into that over on Patreon. There's a bunch of lessons in there, but a stupid movie. Don't watch that and think that you know anything about this. A good movie that I'll tell you about was The Godfather. The Godfather, because that goes back to the old traditions, so kind of what I'm going to say next. And maybe I'll throw it in here. The old guys, the first guys over in the early 1900s, viewed themselves. They brought over lifestyles from Sicily and traditions. They realized that they were outsiders. They were not protected by the government. They had come from a centuries long of corruption in government. They knew they couldn't rely on government. They couldn't rely on the police. They had to establish a way for them to be able to live, to operate, to make a living within their own communities. And this basically was what it was. It was the ultimate responsibility, the self-reliance. This is why there's such good lessons here that I'll be talking about. They developed a way to be able to live well within a larger society that would not help them and in many ways was against them. And of course, this translates directly over to, what do we do if we find ourselves in an oppressive situation? Well, they referred to themselves as men of honor. Basically, that was it. Men of honor or men of the tradition. And what they referred to as the lifestyle was simply the tradition. The Godfather reflected that fairly well. Not in every case, but fairly well. There are a couple of books that I would recommend if any of you are interested in this. The first is a book written by Joe Bonanno. Joe Bonanno was the father. Nobody used the word Godfather. Okay, later on that kind of be interjected, but it wasn't it wasn't a formal or let me say it wasn't used a lot. That the patriarchs of these families, okay, referred to them as father. And Joe Bonanno was one of the fathers of the 5 families. That gets into too much depth here, probably. Most of you don't care. And he had that, and each of these fathers assumed the responsibility, just like a father of a nuclear family does. They accepted the responsibility for the benefit and welfare of those who depended on them. And then they also were looked up to as the father of a family, as the leader of that. Okay, so they were obeyed, or they were, and it isn't strict. I mean, it wasn't, certainly wasn't the strictness of laws that we live under now, but it was a benevolent situation, a feeling of responsibility, with authority only coming with it to the extent that it needed to come in order to enable that responsibility to be carried out. So anyway, I would suggest that he wrote a book called A Man of Honor. It's a great book. It will show you kind of the truth of some of this stuff. His son, Bill, whose real name was Salvatore, but they called him Bill. Bill Bonanno wrote one called Bound by Honor, I think. Bound by Honor. That goes into it more. And another one by a guy that a lot of people put him down. It was Sammy the Bull Gravano wrote a book called Underboss. Good book. Good book. You're going to see now as these situations developed through the years. Naturally, it became it was the government called it crime, right? And it was organized, so they call it organized crime. Well, when the Italians came over, they ran what was called the Italian lottery, which was the numbers game, and they read it in the neighborhood. Italians, just like the Irish before them, they couldn't get jobs. They didn't speak English. Nobody would hire them. Nobody would deal with them. They had to live within their society that they built themselves, and so they played the numbers to where a person could put in a penny, and it's kind of complicated how the numbers were figured out. But the next day, the magic number would be revealed, and if you won, if you hit the right numbers, well, it's just like the lottery, right? And then you could make $10, and back then $10 was a lot. And so these people, they were always living on dreams, and so they would pitch in a penny or a nickel, always with hopes for tomorrow, because tomorrow had to be better than today. Well, it was called that was made illegal by the government, who themselves ran things, and the stock market. And the question was, how come you got a lot of money, you can play the stock market, but I can't put a penny in the local lottery here? And of course, now we have lotteries in every state, right? To do what? Pay for education? Nah, it's a big slush fund. It's a big con. Anyway, so that's how it started. It did, in many cases, develop into things that were not admirable. Those aren't the things that we need to address here. There were situations that we that carry good lessons from that tradition. So if you're interested in that stuff, A Man of Honor by Joe Bonanno, Bound by Honor by his son Bill, and Underboss by Sammy Gravano. Those are good books. I'll say here before I get to the thing that came up today. I'm also going to put in some lessons from the IRA, which is not your retirement fund, but the one in Ireland, and the Gypsies. I've had the opportunity, the good fortune. Life has given me the opportunities to meet interesting people, and there are great lessons from each of those on how to deal with and live under an oppressive government. And for those of you who have differences of opinions on these things, that's okay. Just don't be rude about it. Don't tell me I don't know what I'm talking about, because I do. And people of different sizes will have different opinions. And so there's a lot of lessons that I'm going to bring out in there, and they're very interesting. And I think now the times are coming to where they can be more readily understood by people than maybe even a year ago. So anyway, back to what happened today that made me decide what to talk about. I was out there and a news, my phone dinged, and I saw that there was a news story, and what it was a group of teachers from a school over here in Kansas City, Kansas. And there are two Kansas cities, Kansas City, Missouri, Kansas City, Kansas. Kansas City, Missouri is the big one. I talk about that in my book. Kansas City, Kansas is a separate, right across the river on the Kansas side. Well, a group of teachers from a school in Kansas City, Kansas decided that, and they let all their students know, and all the schools have been shut down, right? So they wanted to keep in touch with their students, and they put out I don't know, I'm not up on social media So whatever they put this out through Twitter, Facebook, I don't know, they put out the message that they would be driving around the streets of the area of the school so they could wave to and say hi to their students. I think that's very admirable. I think that's great. They weren't saying let's all meet in a park because, the governor has said, no groups more than 10 people and you got to stay 6 feet apart and all that kind of stuff. They weren't saying to do that. They said that we're going to drive around and wave to anybody who happens to be out. Well, the police went and they chased all these teachers off. And their excuse was, well, the governor sent down her little decree that you could not have non-essential people out on non-essential business, and driving around waving at students was not essential. How about that? And of course, their defense was the spokesperson from the police department said, well, the governor is the governor, and a governor's order is the order, and we have to obey it, right? Where have we heard that? I was just following orders, right? Okay, so I sent that, and here's the lesson. I sent that to my wife. She immediately got back to me and said the teachers ought to organize an essential trip to the grocery store and let all the students know that they were going to do it and when they were going to do it. You see, that was the perfect response. That was the immediate, and my wife would be a good, if we go back to the so-called Mafia traditions, and if you watch the Godfather, you might be familiar with this term, the consigliere, the counselor, the one who counsels the Don, the father. Okay, Don is simply it means sir. Okay, so it's a title of respect. She would also be. Kelly is also what would be termed mafioso, which simply means in Italian, strong, brave, beautiful, those types of things. Okay, it's not some guy in a shiny suit with a switchblade. It's a word that means excellence. Okay, and Kelly is like that. She immediately came up with that. That's an indication of how we may need to adjust our thinking. How do we get done what we want to get done? Not just what we need to get done, what we want to get done under oppressive laws. Something to think about. And I'll leave you with that. Okay? And I'll say that I hope you all have a good day. Remember that we prepare well today in order to live well tomorrow. And again, part of those preparations is how do we deal with restrictions and still get done what we need to. So you all have a good day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.